I'm Bob Willard. I'm going to say a few words to introduce Lorraine. I first met Lorraine back in the early 2000s when she was working for CBSR, Canadian Business for Social Responsibility. And it was just a treat to be able to connect with someone who was on the same wavelength that I was on at that point, which was trying to engage businesses in being more sustainable. And then we kind of parted ways for a while, and she went to New York to work for a company called Sustainability with a capital A. There was an effort that I was undertaking at that time with a group called the Natural Step Canada, TNS Canada, which was to put together a benchmark for companies that was respectful of the science behind how the world works, and that was natural step science. And I was doing a presentation in Toronto to a bunch of people just to explain where we were on putting this thing together. And Lorraine connected me with somebody that she insisted come from London, England, to this session in Toronto to hear me do my thing. And this guy I'd never met before. He sat in the back. He was taking a few notes. I didn't know who he was. And at the end, he came up and he said, "We need to talk." And that was Jeff Kendall. And it ended up with him and me and a couple of other people putting together the Future Fit Business Benchmark. It was just such a treat. So Lorraine, thank you for that. As usual, Lorraine's a connector. She's the hub of so many fantastic networks. And she's also a person that can straddle so many different mindsets. And has the courage to say things that a lot of us would like to say, but can't quite say them as articulately as Lorraine can. She can be a hard-nosed business analyst as well as almost a spiritual person that connects with these themes at a very, very different level. It's amazing. Probably one of the most prolific in terms of writing people that I've ever met. I write a blog maybe every 3 months. She writes one a day. Some of them are videoed, some of them are voice. It's just incredible. And they're all good. They're really good. I mean, it's not just trivial stuff. It's deep, it's referenced, it's incredible. So every time I have a chance to connect with Lorraine, I leap at the opportunity because I always learn something. We're going to learn something tonight. The path to industrial healing. Just look at the phraseology of that. The path to industrial healing. Every time I hear Lorraine, I learn something and I unlearn something. And that's the fun part. So we're all going to have a little bit of a journey here for the next 40, 45 minutes. And then there are going to be opportunities for questions. So let's listen and learn and have a good time. Lorraine.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bob, for those incredibly kind and encouraging words, for your years of encouragement and support for me and for many people in this room. If you don't know Bob, he's really been an inspiration and a leader for so many of us. And if you do, you know that what I just said is very true. Thank you also to all of you. This is one of those sort of frisson moments. I am deeply honored to see all of you here sharing your time, your evening, your energy, your attention. So without further ado, I will jump in. I've had the very good pleasure of meeting many of you, in fact, knowing many of you, some of you since kindergarten and even before, others I've worked with, and then some are brand new and I just met you or haven't even met you yet. So for those who don't know who I am, I'm Lorraine Smith. I'm currently a resident of Montreal. I am a writer. I am a coach one-on-one with individuals. I do some advisory work with executive and board teams in companies as well. I do some research, and once in a while I do some public speaking, which is what I'm about to do with you here. And on that note, I'll jump right in. Bob mentioned we're here to follow a little bit along my journey towards industrial healing. And I'd like to clarify what I mean by that. It's quite a dynamic and all-encompassing process in many ways. It's, as far as I understand, what happens when the economy works in service of life. And that is my vision, an economy that works in service of life. Everything I do, that writing, research, coaching, advising, is all in service of life as best as I am able. But I want to make sure we're really clear on what that means, because companies talk a lot about purpose. We hear this purpose word in the economy quite a bit, many companies. Let me just clarify what I don't mean. So you might be familiar with one of the bigger companies out there, Google. They're so big, they're a verb. Their purpose is actually pretty cool. It's making all of the world's data accessible to everyone, everywhere. I love that purpose. They've written it down, it's on their website, and that's good. I actually Googled earlier today, you might have as well. How they make money? Well, in 2021, the last time I took a really close look at their financials, they earned 158 billion US dollars, the majority of which came from selling advertising. Advertising isn't necessarily bad, but I think we might collectively agree it's also not necessarily in service of life. It's usually in service of selling more stuff, more services, more flights, things that we consume. And so we would say that while they state what their purpose is, what they actually do is something else. And the economy that I hold in my vision is one where all companies, all economic entities, at all scales in all regions, serving all needs and wants, serve life. We're a little ways away from that. And so I've been thinking about that for some time. I'd like to share a bit of that journey. One of the things I've noticed on this journey is when I talk about this, there is some discomfort. Actually, quite a bit of discomfort. I would say this is an uncomfortable conversation. About 2/3 of the people that I talk to take this discomfort, they process it in a kind of like, sort of way. And maybe actually refute it in their own minds or out loud. And I welcome that, and there will be time for sure to hear your thoughts in case they don't align. I'm really interested in what other people think. About another third take on this discomfort and it energizes them. You know, I've been thinking similar thoughts. You're saying something out loud that's been in the back of my mind that I couldn't quite put words to. I've been wondering the same thing. In fact, I said something similar even further ahead the other day. It is uncomfortable, and we need to do something about it. We're not entirely sure what, but just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean we don't deal with it, accept it, let it in. So I just wanted to signal there may be some discomfort, and to not shy away from it if you can. What we all do with it is kind of up to us, and that's ever evolving, by the way. And I'll say, I'm pretty uncomfortable too at times. So here's a little mini agenda. I'm going to tell you how to be a sustainability consultant in case you'd like to. It's very easy and you can make a lot of money. Then I'm going to tell you why I stopped being a sustainability consultant. I'll spend a little bit more time on that so you can understand where some of the trouble is. That's where some discomfort will quite likely occur. And then, because these are big things, did I mention my vision is an economy that works in service of life? That's all businesses at all scales at every region. That is existential. That is huge. That is all of us. I don't actually have an answer or even a formula. Spoiler alert, I'm not even going to tell you what to do or suggest things for you to do. I have some ideas, but I have more questions than anything else. What I do have is a way that I stay motivated, because I think this is a worthy vision. I actually think it's a lot of fun. I love my work, and it can be really dark and really heavy. And so I have 3 tricks, if you will, or 3 ways that I keep myself motivated. And I thought I'd share those with you after I kind of depress you no end. Make you a little bit uncomfortable. First, I would be remiss if I didn't share some words on behalf of my sponsor. These are some ducks who are not in a row, and they live on the St. Lawrence River, where I have the great fortune to spend a lot of time running, walking, thinking, listening, learning. And I really do think of them and all the other life around me that keeps me alive as my sponsor. Nobody has commissioned this work. I just do it because I think it makes sense. I'm called to do it. And everything I'm about to share in terms of corporate information, disclosures, etc., it's all public. I'm only relying on what has been made public. There are footnotes. You can't see them, but they're in the slides. If you would like to know more, just ask me. I'm happy to make this available. And if there are errors, I want to correct them. I want to be wrong on a lot of these things. In fact, many parts of this, I dream of publishing that retraction, where I was like, you know what? I totally screwed this up. It's way better than I thought. I'm sorry that I gave you that wrong information. Please, here is a better version. If you have it, please share it in whatever format is good. Heckle publicly on one of my public articles. Say something at the end of this conversation. Reach out to me offline in whatever way works. Let's jump into number 1, just in case you aren't already a sustainability consultant, which a few of you might be. How many of you would sort of put yourself directly in the field? I recognize some of you. Yeah, so lots of folks are already here. So hopefully some of this will sound true. and helpful. And I think you'll notice that we're all in the business of change, right? We're looking to make real change. I think that is consistent and a beautiful thing. And so we're sort of here, but we'd like to get there. And the thing is, we're trying to figure out which way we go. So just to double check, when we talk about sustainability, there's a lot of different acronyms, jargon that gets thrown around, but mostly there's a lot of issues that we're trying to make changes on. So let me just take the temperature a little. We've got environmental issues, and I'm curious what you would see as some of the issues. So hit me popcorn style with some environmental issues. Anyone?
Climate change.
Climate change, what else?
Biodiversity loss.
Biodiversity loss, yeah. What else?
Ocean acidification.
Yep. Any more?
Soil degradation.
Mm-hmm.
Solid waste.
Mm-hmm.
Plastic waste.
Right, so there's lots. These are, I was gonna say they're good. They're not, they're great examples. What about social issues? So people, our own individual wellness, community, wider society. What kind of issues come up for you when you think about that? Anyone?
Income inequality.
Nice, inequality. Others? Displacement. Sorry, there's one here. Housing affordability. What else? Human rights, big one. Gender equality, right. So there's already a lot of diversity, and if we had nothing but time, we'd come up with lots more. So happily, you are already fairly qualified as sustainability consultants. You've just conducted a pretty thorough assessment that many of us get paid to do. I'll go a little deeper into my experience as a sustainability consultant and unpick that a little more. So in the year 2003, I left my last kind of mainstream corporate job, which was in financial services, and I took a job at Canadian Business for Social Responsibility, which is where I first met Bob, and a few of you I had the pleasure of encountering. I had no idea what I was getting into. I couldn't even remember the acronym, but that's what I did. And for the next 5 or so years, I worked quite hard at CBSR. My job, so this would be kind of part of your to-do list if you want to go there, would be things like stakeholder engagement, understanding the issues and concerns of a range of stakeholders within large companies, in their supply chains, in their communities. I'm bilingual, so I did some of the French and Montreal-based work. Things like understanding what the retail and apparel makers of Canada were facing, and at that time the sweatshop labor issue was really big. In fact, here in the Textile Museum, I used to convene the retail learning circle where Mountain Equipment Co-op, HBC, sometimes Walmart. I think Heather, you might have actually spoken at one of those. So we had all kinds of fun in this very museum, which, by the way, I used to be a volunteer at as a textile artisan, and some of my textile friends are here as well. So lots of crossover and interconnected threads there. Fast forward a few years, I felt that I really was not having the impact I hoped for. Although there was great work, I really met amazing people, fantastic clients, really interesting work, working on these issues, a number of which we just threw out. I left the organization as a paid employee. I became a freelancer. I ultimately went on to join the board, which I was on until 2019. I was, this is actually from the lobby of CBSR in Vancouver. I was there to eat positive change. That's printed in their lobby. And that's what I thought I was doing, but I really didn't feel I was having enough impact. So I went to freelance, and as a freelancer, I started to work with more global companies. I found myself working in New York. I moved to New York in 2009. And from there, I was continuing to freelance. I got hired on sustainability, as Bob mentioned. And you know, the world was my oyster. I was getting more and more interesting jobs, working with more and more international companies. I'm very blessed to be a Portuguese speaker as well. So I was getting tapped to go to Brazil, did some work with the largest pulp and paper company in the world, a large Brazilian bank. I was working with more and more interesting companies, better and better humans who knew so much about the world, and we were all there to make positive change. And yet, that same frustration that was creeping in when I was at CBSR kept coming back. But are we really making change? And so, you know, we found ourselves competing with, this is a screen grab from McKinsey, one of the big 4 consulting companies. More and more, I found that I was in projects where we were pitching up against McKinsey or PwC or Deloitte, Accenture. You'll see this term environmental, social, and governance that gets shortened as ESG in the field. More and more, the big guys were getting into the game. We were competing with them or actually collaborating with them. So we were part of contracts or projects where we'd work with the big 4. So we were starting to merge with management consulting, really getting at the core strategy of the company, which seemed exciting. It seemed like, yeah, this is what we need, more senior, more core. And yet, even as this signals a kind of community inclusion and green orientation, more and more I was feeling like we just weren't getting done what needed to be done. And here's where, as you're upskilling as sustainability consultants, you'll see where some of the trouble lies. So we'll go into the black box. Again, I'm only going to share publicly available data, but I'll tell you a little bit about what happens behind the scenes for it to exist. Let's go into the black box of sustainability, and let's take a look at what an ESG materiality assessment is. It turns out we just conducted one. I asked you what you think the issues are, and you gave me some great ideas about what the issues are. That is literally what a materiality assessment is. It turns out that companies will want to do a more specific one for themselves. They will pay in and around $40,000 to $250,000, that's US. Those are real numbers from real contracts that I was part of. I didn't get paid that, but I was on the team for companies that did. And we would conduct these assessments, helping companies figure out what their issues are. Why? By asking to a range of internal and external stakeholders, doing surveys, doing lots of desk research, and thinking about the issues. So what does that look like? Well, here's a dramatization of an actual event, because as I said, I won't be sharing actual confidential information, but I think you'll get the picture. You might have heard of the company Coca-Cola, one of the largest beverage companies in the world. I did not conduct their materiality assessment, although I did conduct dozens and or was a stakeholder who was interviewed for many others. Coca-Cola paid some consultants to create this grid. This is a very common approach to plot a matrix that shows on the vertical what are the most important issues to external stakeholders. To the company, what's most important to their own operations. And we see lots of issues. There's too much here to unpack. Let me make it a little more readable for you and go to the top right. Consultants love to look at prioritized issues. Let me make that even easier. It turns out that Coca-Cola paid some consultants, we don't know how much, but I think it's reasonable to say between $40,000 and $250,000 to determine that important issues for the world's largest beverage company include nutrition, water, and packaging. They repeat these assessments about every 2 years. Let's look at one of their competitors. Danone, a global food company, competitor to Coca-Cola, headquartered in France. They too conducted one. They paid their consultants to use colors to code the issue type and to use size of bubble to suggest importance of time. These things do matter. Do they matter on a grid? I don't know. And you will once again notice that things like packaging waste and nutrition and food and water matter to another global food company. What a coincidence. This is how the money is being spent in corporate social responsibility and sustainability. These are worthy things to do, but are they actually making change? And this is what I kept wondering, especially for companies where year over year I was engaged in these strategic discussion tools, as we called them, and I didn't see anything strategically changing. Literally, I did not see one impact of a materiality assessment, other than lots of PowerPoints and meetings and busy people and paid consultants. But I did not see a change. Those issues you just mentioned, other than more disclosures, I did not see an actual change. This is something I would genuinely love to be wrong on, so please load your Q&A gun for that one. What I did see was a lot more reporting and transparency. Companies would use these assessments to produce reports. And I also got to produce some of those reports. And there's lots of things in here, what the company does, how much money they make, things they're proud of, like for instance, Danone, global food company headquartered in France, is very proud to share in their report that 84% of their packaging is recyclable, reusable, or compostable. 84%. We could wonder about the other 16%, or we could give them the benefit of the doubt for the vast majority. So I keep thinking, what is changing? Because we're trying to change things, right? We're not just trying to have more reports. And what I notice, rounding the corner of 2016, is nothing is changing. More people are busy. Sustainability consultants are exhausted, flying around the world, getting paid to do cool talks in interesting parts of the world. But they're not really able to make systemic change. We talk constantly about systems change, and then we produce PowerPoint presentations for executives who are not all that engaged in the topic. January 2016, I'm still in New York. I'm still working full-time as the director of the New York Office of Sustainability, but I'm really nibbling on the bars of my cage. I'm not seeing this change happening. And so I go independent one more time, and that was my last paycheck, January 2016. And I say, I'm going to go out on my own, and I'm only going to work for those companies where I can be truly courageous. I'm going to say what needs saying. I'm going to bust through these barriers. It's going to happen. And so I did a lot of really cool work in those years. I got invited to go into coal mines. I flew in helicopters over coal mines, private company jets to the plantations in Brazil. I got invited into more boardrooms, more conferences, really cool conversations where people would say, you know, Lorraine, it's really cool that you're so courageous, you're willing to say out loud what others aren't saying. Great, what are we going to change? Nothing. Or I would hear, well, you know, that's a great idea. We could do things that way, but maybe not this business cycle. Let's gather a bit more data. Why don't we survey another round of stakeholders and have a roundtable? Let's do another benchmarking. And so finally, in 2021, I've returned to Canada. I'm living in Montreal, and I do what any reasonable 50-year-old would do when she's frustrated with her work. I went for a very long run. 255 kilometers over 5 days. I had some rest points. They're marked there. I was extremely blessed to have the amazing Sarah Kleimenhage, who I believe is here, helping me, riding alongside, treating me like a queen as I was fed and watered and guided along the way. And that run was a sort of break for me, where from there I held the question, what is changing? And more importantly for me in that moment, what is mine to do? And so from there, that is a little bit about why I stopped being a sustainability consultant. I started to dig a little deeper into that why. I stopped accepting new work, project work. I stopped accepting paid projects. I wound down the ones that I was working on. I talked to friends and mentors and people who gave me incredible guidance and encouragement and said, we hear you, you don't quite know what it is you're trying to do, but you're trying to articulate something. Keep going, keep going. And so from there, I began a process of bringing reality into materiality. Now, in a way, you could say I just kind of spelled it differently. And I did, which leads to all kinds of confusion. Now I actually can't remember which way to spell which. But what I really did was I sort of went into my virtual garage. I got busy. It was a good time of humanity to go into one's virtual garage. And I got busy working on a series of assessments for companies with whom I had never worked commercially before. So I couldn't inadvertently reveal some information that wouldn't have been appropriate to do so. And so you'll recognize Google, TD Bank. I've been a customer since I was 7, but never worked for them. Danone, the global food company. JBS, which is one of the largest food companies also in the world, a meat producer headquartered in Brazil. And Glencore, one of the world's largest mining companies. I made all of this open source. I conducted assessments based on the way I thought they should be conducted. I basically said, I'm going to stop complaining about what's wrong. I'm going to stop expecting these executives to believe me and do something differently and pay me to do it. I'm going to stop saying why I think it's broken, and I'm going to go and see if I can fix it. I had no idea what I was doing, but I went ahead and did it. And so one of the things that really bothered me about materiality matrices and projects and assessments generally is we would spend all this time creating lists of issues. We would literally prioritize issues, one in relation to the other. And what happens when you pit human rights against climate change? You have really dynamic conversations with executives, but you don't really change much on the ground. Instead, each of these bubbles, again, it's tricky to see from there, so you'll just have to take my word on it and then go look at these publicly available open source free assessments to know that this matrix asks, is the company contributing to life? Or is it undermining it? Why do you think that? Tell me more. Why do you think that? Tell me more. Each of these bubbles represents a person who agreed to be interviewed and have their entire interview shared as a live video and a transcript. Some of these are in Portuguese. The Portuguese ones are in English, so they're as accessible as possible. And I really felt it was important to stop categorizing issues and start categorizing contribution to life. There were a few other things I did differently on this one. You might have noticed off the top of this live conversation in this one actual place where we all are, that I did not do a land acknowledgement. That wasn't an oversight, I didn't forget. When I first moved back to Canada in 2019, a lot had happened. I'd been gone for about a decade, and a lot had happened, including this new habit of having a land acknowledgement at the beginning of meetings. And I sort of missed the memo. I miss a lot of memos. I missed that one. And so when I got dropped into it, I found it felt very performative and not informative and not encouraging in any way. And I also found, it sort of reminded me when I was in primary school, there was a moment, I don't know who flicked the switch, but there was a moment where we all had to recite the Lord's Prayer. And I was not raised Christian, so I did not know the Lord's Prayer. And so I had to memorize it, and I would find myself saying the words, "Forgive us for our trespasses." And I think, what trespasses? And when I heard the land acknowledgements, I felt like this was another way of saying, "Forgive us for our trespasses." And I found myself thinking, well, I don't want to ask people who I didn't trespass for forgiveness. I want to act in a way that merits forgiveness. And doesn't just merit forgiveness, it is giving. It is thoughtful about what is to be given going forward, which I only barely understand. And so instead of muttering words that I'm supposed to say that I don't totally understand, I reach out to people to say, what do you think? Because I'm lost on this one. I'd love some help, and I'd love to be giving and not have more to be forgiven for. I'm very blessed to be good friends with this gentleman, Chuck Barnett. He's a Mohawk tree farmer. He currently resides in Ganasatake, which most Canadians might recognize as the area known as Oka. A lot of trespasses to talk about. He shared his views on TD Bank and had a lot of really intelligent views. There are a number of other stakeholders whom I interviewed for that. I believe I also interviewed Bob Willard. I interviewed a number of people to gain perspective. I feel like it's essential for me as a human trying to contribute to an economy and service of life to understand perspective, especially of Indigenous peoples, not as a pro forma way of checking a box, but to actually understand. Meanwhile, TD Bank, it says Indigenous as a word mentioned 71 times. That is in TD Bank's ESG report, the report I was studying for the assessment. The word Indigenous is mentioned 71 times. It is mentioned in a list of issues. It is mentioned grouped with things they are thinking about. It is mentioned as a reference to being aware that the residential school system was a problem, being aware that we need better banking opportunities in the north. Beyond that, we can say there is really no insight and no wisdom from Indigenous peoples in this report. Perhaps there is more, but it's a black box. We cannot see what conversations they had with whom about what. I also feel that it's very important to gain perspective from more than humans. I think humans are interesting. I think we're important in our own way. I think we've had an outsized impact on the world around us, but we really are just one species among trillions, I think. And so we really would do well to stop centering ourselves in these conversations about what is important to industry. And so I seek to engage the more than human world. This is tricky because I am human and I'm speaking English or a few other languages, and I'm trying to write things down in a way that's useful. But I still think it's important. That's not a good reason not to do it. So when I did my Google assessment, I thought, well, why don't I put my money where my mouth is? Because I've been saying to companies, you need to ask the wider world, nature, if you need to call it that. You need to ask more than humans, what do they think? How are they harmed? How do they benefit? What would they want if they were running the show? This is not uniquely me asking this. I'm learning this from others. For the Google assessment, I reached out to a gentleman by the name of Ricardo Cardim. How many of you have heard of the Amazon rainforest? Hands up if that's familiar. How many of you have heard of the Mata Atlantica, the Atlantic forest? Interesting. It is as big as and as biodiverse as the Amazon forest. It is in Brazil. It is a huge territory. Only 7%, depending on how you count, remains. The rest has been fairly devastated by human settlement, mostly post-European contact. Ricardo Cardim is one of the most knowledgeable human beings on Earth about the Mata Atlantica. When you speak with him, you can speak with the forest. I've had the pleasure of working with him. I saw this happening in real life, and I thought when I did the Google assessment, I've got to talk to Ricardo because he can talk for the forest, to a degree, of course. Ricardo, I'm doing this assessment. I've got this crazy idea. I need more than human perspective. Will you speak on behalf of the Mata Atlantica? And he said, without missing a beat, of course, I know exactly what you mean. It's recorded. You can listen to him speaking. It's a Portuguese conversation. There are English subtitles and an English transcription. One of the things he said a lot, but I'll just put one little piece here. He said, you know, you humans, if one of your arms is cut off and it's over there, and your leg is cut off and it's over there, and your liver is cut out and it's over there, you will die in a few minutes. The forest is the same. The difference is it might happen over years, but it's the same. This is a site in São Paulo, a megacity of 20 million people in Brazil that is former Mata Atlantica, a contaminated, abandoned gas station that Ricardo got permission from the city to rehabilitate into a pocket forest of Atlantic forest. Only 5 years later, watch in the top right corner, it's tough to see, but there is the face of a woman on a painted mural. I'm going to go back. There is her face here. So see these trees here? 5 years later, this is a forest. And that's a few years ago. It's grown more. This is the most comparable photo I have. When I was there in 2019, in this forest that was taken around that at night, there are bats, fruit bats, enjoying the fruits of these trees. That Ricardo, understanding the forest and its need to have integrity, to be whole, to come back together, they are there. So these voices are around us. We have the ability to hear them when we ask what they think. There's a lot in these assessments. You can bore yourself to tears and go through those decks if you like. I'll just pull out some of what I tried to do here, because I'm not trying to take down the man. I'm not trying to say, you companies aren't doing good assessments, you aren't putting out good data. I'm trying to say, imagine if your purpose was to work in service of life. Imagine if you, Google, were aware that the Mata Atlantica was just as happy about your success as your investors are. What would that look like? The Mata Atlantica is like, Google, you did it, right? What would it look like if TD Bank only transacted on things that restored biodiversity? For instance, these are ideas. This is not a formula. What would it look like if Danone only talked to their investors about healthy foods that had no packaging waste? Which, by the way, the assessments include a lot of investor dialogue. I can tell you that's not what they're talking about right now. So that's what I did with those assessments, and I got two really helpful pieces of feedback. One was, Lorraine, these are really cool. They're packed with amazing information. Nobody else is doing this homework for us. We're really glad you did it. The other was, we don't know what to do with these. Can you please help us make some sense? It's kind of useful, but we need it to be more useful. So I went ahead and created a Substack. How many of you read things on Substack or are aware of Substack? Oh, wow. Okay, that's actually a surprise, because so it's for those who don't know it, it's a platform that anybody can publish on, anybody can read on. There's a few Substackers in here. So Sydney Bloom, Sarah Kleiman-Haga, I'm aware of your Substacks, and there's probably more. So feel free to advertise for yourself after. Anybody can publish. Sometimes it's behind a paywall, sometimes it's not. I had this vision, and have had a number of times, of this character named Kelly. Kelly is an amalgam of clients, human clients that I've worked with in the past. And Kelly has said over and over, I just don't have time to do this stuff. There's so much out there. There's so many conferences, so many reports, so many cool new ideas. I don't know what to do about it. What you're doing is kind of in those trenches that I wish I had time to play in. You are playing in them. Can you play in a way that I can do something with? And that is the Material World Substack. I'm going to quickly take you through one example so you see what I mean. The focus of the work I'm doing now is really homing in on what has changed, what is changing, what needs to change. Because without change, we're just going to go round and round. So this says at the bottom, what changed? 10 years of plastic waste, sustainability goals. We set a goal, we want to achieve it, right? So what would change if we achieved these goals? In the piece in the Material World called Our Purpose is to Dump Garbage on Your Lawn, said no CPG company ever. CPG is consumer packaged goods, and this came about because I noticed there's a lot of plastic on a lot of lawns. And we look at CPG companies' purposes, but it just doesn't align with what we're actually seeing. So what have they been doing? Well, what I did was I took a look at 5 of the largest consumer goods companies in the world: Coca-Cola, Danone, L'Oreal, Nestle, and P&G. I won't take you through all that. I'll just give you a quick snapshot of what I saw, because it highlights why reality would come in really handy in these things. And we could do so well to see it and then do something with it. So Coca-Cola you will remember as the experts here that Coca-Cola thinks that packaging, by the way, that's plastic packaging, is its most material issue. This is public. This goes to their investors. This comes from their board. This is not a newsflash. This is what they say. Packaging, most material issue. So what were they doing about it? Well, 10 years ago, they were already on it. We knew this was a problem. In 2013, I looked at their sustainability reporting from that time, and they had some goals around it. They were trying to get about 25% of their PET, that's polyethylene, the plastic bottles. We probably all have some with us. By the way, this is all of us, not just companies, about that uncomfortable thing. So they had a goal, 25% to be made from recycled. At the time, they'd only gotten to 6%, but they were sharing, that's kind of cool. 10 years later, they upped the goal. Hey, you know what, 25% is not enough. Let's go to 50%, make 50% recycled. Cool. And it turns out they've met that 25%, which was their original goal. So they're raising the bar. There's a footnote. Let's skim over that because it just muddies the waters. It doesn't help us at all. What helps us is that in that very same report, they disclose, this sounds very kind of gentle, that growth of plastics has outpaced efforts in lightweighting, outpaced efforts in using recycled content. That's a way of saying, well, we are using more recycled, but we're making more of everything. So goals kind of achieved, maybe we have the wrong goals. Let's just take a peek at Danone, because this to me is super telling. They're the ones that we looked at earlier. We saw their materiality assessment, where again, packaging, one of their number one issues. They had kind of similar goals. What a surprise. They're all looking at each other. They probably paid a consultant to do some benchmarking. What should our goal be? How about 25%? Cool, and it turns out they'd already achieved their goal, which is confusing. 10 years later, they changed the goal. Instead of recycled content, they basically said, you know what, let's just make everything recyclable or reusable or compostable. Everything, no excuse, let's do the whole thing. And we see that we saw the highlight in their overview of their transparency and reporting from their materiality assessment that 84% of their packaging is indeed recyclable, reusable, or compostable. I'm not quite ready to let go of the 16%, but I can say, well, okay, that's a pretty big number, right? Reality. This is a big graph that's telling us things that are uncomfortable. Only 9% of plastic waste is recycled globally. This is a confusing graph. Let's just look at the part that's important. That kind of minty stuff on the right, that is the recycled stuff. It is the minority. This isn't what you did with it in your kitchen and then on your lawn. This is what the world is doing with whatever you did in your kitchen. And by the way, lest we think, well, yeah, but Canada's pretty good, right? Canada's the top row. See how small that little minty bit is on the right? This is what's going on in the world. This isn't really a surprise, but it's kind of like when you look at the corporate disclosures, you think everything's getting better, but it's not. This is reality. And by the way, this isn't just recycled material. This is plastics. This graph shows that over the last 10 years, plastic use, all plastic of any type, anywhere, has been growing. Why? Because we're buying more stuff. This isn't really a mystery. This isn't even really news. It's like, why do I even have to say this? Also, we have companies saying, but don't worry, we're using recycled material. We're fixing the problem, right? Even though it's kind of galloping further than we can, maybe if we get it really, really right. Well, I don't know, like if past is prologue here, the object of the game looks like growth. We are consuming more plastic, including recycled. So this thin line along the top is recycled. Yes, the recycled is growing, but it's not growing as fast as everything else. It is not eclipsing or replacing the everything else. So we could say, companies, man, they're so profit-driven, greed, I knew it. But this isn't about throwing companies under the bus. This is not about sticking it to the man. This is about noticing what's happening in us that makes this normal. Not just normal, but profitable. This is a screen grab from the Canadian government's Net Zero and Sustainability webpage. There's a lot I could say about a lot here. Just for the moment, I'm going to home in on the waste visual. I don't know about you, but I find it really weird that we're proud to say that we have waste receptacles so big that children could fit inside of them. I also find it weird that we have garbage day every week. We pay really expensive companies to come and pick up our garbage that is profitable for those 5 CPG companies to say they're reducing. And this is what it looks like on garbage day in my neighborhood. That's from about 2 doors down. I don't know what it looks like in your neighborhood, depending on how nice and fancy everything is. Maybe it's in some of those nice big receptacles that children could fit in. Most of this will go to landfill or be littered in this country that is very rich and peaceful. Speaking of net zero and discomfort, I'm going to just spend a bit of time on here. We can touch on more in the Q&A if there's appetite. Energy is a big topic. It is not my main swim lane. I'll touch on this briefly. There's a lot to energy in terms of how we produce it and how we use it. I want to stick in the corporate disclosure bit for bit and just take us back into the black box, especially now that you're all so qualified. So TD Bank, I mentioned I did an assessment on them. they look like they're very interested in all of these things. So, sure enough, materiality assessment, and what do you know? Lots of things on the top right. No surprise they're looking at climate change and sustainable finance. It's always a little fun. This is where it gets like, wait, so corporate governance is an issue, but governance is the G in ESG, so the issue is the issue, the whole thing is the issue? I don't know, what's the issue? Anyways, they are thinking about climate change and sustainable finance. And so, lucky us, they've produced a whole report on climate change and the actions they're taking. And it's full of really big numbers, billions, and lots of bar charts and all kinds of things. But you can't actually see how they're spending the money, which I found really frustrating because that's all they do. They're a bank. I, repeat, have been a customer since I was 7, so I like them. So what I did, because I couldn't find information about the money in the report about their climate action, is I went to their annual reports. I made this graph. It's footnoted if you want to check my abilities to make a graph with a Google Sheet. The numbers are extracted from their annual report from 2011 and 2021, 10 years apart. Because what I saw in their climate action report was, it kind of looks like, let's just go back, it kind of looks like they're a professional tree planting company. As a former professional tree planter, I'd like to say this is what we call a monospecies plantation for future industrial use, but that's another story. I took their data from 10 years ago and more recently to see what are they doing with their lending. They're doing a lot of different things with their money, so I couldn't parse it all completely, but what I did do was look at their loan portfolio. And for instance, they have doubled their loans to oil and gas pipelines. That sounds like a different sort of climate action than I would have thought. They've done a lot of doubling to oil and gas pipelines. Utilities, we could say, well, was it hydro? Was it nuclear? We could have some fun conversations there. But it's a little hard to see how doubling your investment in pipelines is climate action. And it's, as far as I could tell, and again, please prove me wrong, I will have a party and I will do anything you tell me to have the retraction conversation about how this is not what they're doing and that you could follow the money in their climate action report. By the way, it's not just TD. I went to some more public data on energy use. They're not alone. This is what's going on in the world. We are burning more fossil fuels. It's only going up. All the net zero roadmaps in the world. By the way, I pulled this out of a site about a net zero roadmap. I don't know about you, but if I want to go that way, I don't think I should go that way. It just doesn't stand to reason. And it's not just energy use, right? I'm going to superimpose in a very weird way that's even harder to read, the plastics graphic. That's the one we just looked at a few minutes ago. That is what's going on with plastic. We are consuming more. It's a very similar graph. This is more. No matter what the companies are saying their goals are, the reality is they're producing more fossil fuels, plastics, etc. Deep breath in the land of discomfort. Another way companies are trying to meet their green targets, especially real estate, financial services companies, is through green buildings. They have certifications called LEED, BOMA, and others that look at things like, what are the materials they're using? Are they sustainable? What kind of energy are they consuming? Are they consuming less? Are they more efficient? This sounds very nice, and TD Asset Management was very proud to say that they've increased the number of buildings that they have within their assets that are certified by this by 1% more. So it's more than half, and it's even more than half. And I could quibble about the numbers, but actually I don't want to quibble about the numbers. I want to quibble about what this has to do with an economy and service of life. This is a screen grab from an article from a commercial real estate publication that was very proud to say that more than 71% of Chicago's commercial office space is now certified to some sort of green certification. More than 71% of Chicago, a major US city, is now certified to some green standard or other, and some more than one. That's a really high percentage. These are some of the birds that were collected from one of the worst bird strikes in history just a few weeks ago when the winged migration was happening from north to south. These are migratory birds that struck buildings in Chicago. More than 71% of commercial office space in Chicago is green certified. I think if you asked any of these warblers or other birds if they think that certification was merited, they would say no. Some of those buildings are in our flyway. And we're building more, and we're certifying more. And green certified square footage is often rented out or leased out at a premium. You get more money if you do these things. And no one asked these guys. They're making it pretty clear, though. And this is one very simple way we can listen to more than human voices. That's just underscoring why I stopped being a sustainability consultant. So I've put some pretty heavy things out here, and it is uncomfortable. And so I want to share how I stay motivated, because I'm not interested in being a jerk. I'm not interested in showing people what's wrong and saying, we've got to stop this. This is really bad. We're bad people. Look at us consuming everything. I'm really interested in an economy that works in service of life. I think it would be awesome. I think there's already elements of it all around us. And for the most part, except when I encounter dead birds at the bases of buildings, which I have done, and you probably have too. And when I steep in this and I don't feel good, I want to stay motivated to keep going. And for the most part, I am. I love my work. I'm actually quite joyful on most days. So how? Here come 3 tips, and then we'll crack things wide open and see what you think. The first is I live in the paradigm I want. As much as I can, I bring my mind into what I think would be better. I either say it out loud and share it with anyone who will pay attention, or I just go there in my mind. What does that look like? Looks like a lot of things on a given day, but I'll share a specific example. I just talked about that plastic usage thing, that every region, it's going up everywhere. It's not looking good no matter what the companies say. Well, I was born in the early 70s. So I lived at a time that was almost not true. And some of you who are older lived at a time when there was no plastic waste. This is not fiction or fantasy. This is a way we have been. And people alive in this room right now and all around the world, especially in regions where plastic came a little more lately, know it's true, know it's possible, lived well, looked after each other, had beautiful homes and wonderful families. So when I want to live in that paradigm, I make a new graph. And I go, what would it look like? I took the same numbers, the same regions, the same ideas, and I just said, well, we're here now. I want to go here. And I just sit with that. How would I be if I were there? How far from that am I now? How far from that are you now? What's the difference between us here and there? What would it look like? Big questions. I don't have all the answers, but that's one example of what I do to put myself in the paradigm I want. It's there. It's all around us. It's ready for us whenever we are. This one's fun. I stay open to complexity and contradiction. That's another way of saying polarization is my friend if I stay in right relationship with it. So here we have 2 colors that are opposites. If your retina work the way mine do, some may actually only see one color here or kind of shades of gray. I find that polarization and complexity are quite fun because they're full of data. Anybody who took Latin will know the verb dare, and its participle datum is the root of the word data. Dare is to give. Datum is a gift. Every piece of data is a gift, including why I think one thing and you may think the absolute opposite. Or we may all be kind of aligned here, but those other people, yeesh, right? There's a few things that are really helpful to embrace and welcome contradiction. One is if we fight against it, but I know I'm right and I just need to tell you you're wrong. I'm sitting usually in a space of fear or frustration or anger. Those are not open emotions. They're closing. They shut down our creativity. They create others. But also, we miss the good stuff. Like, you know, it turns out that even when I think I'm really, 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 really right, there's probably some stuff I still don't know. And especially sustainability folks, we are renowned for thinking we know. It's the science. Those other people are crazy. Well, the science is changing all the time. And crazy people know a lot and have through the ages. We were crazy, and now we're not, because we're really into sustainability. And remember, not that long ago, some of you will know, before the management consultants got at us, we were the crazy ones. Next thing, we're the ones they want in the room, because we're not crazy anymore. Well, there's always crazy people coming down the pipe. Welcome them. Ask them what they think. Stay curious. I have found I am far more motivated, having way more fun, when I'm listening openly in a space that is genuinely willing to hear. Not compassionate, like, oh, too bad about them, but I'll be nice. Actually, genuinely curious. And the number of times I've changed my own mind is getting higher every day, and I am happier and more motivated for it. The last one, you're probably getting to hear this pattern from me. It's one, by the way, this comes up a lot with folks that I coach and sort of listen to trying to move into this new paradigm to guide us towards this idea of listening to different life forms. I don't want to give instructions or pretend I speak on behalf of anything other than myself, but I do think it's really important to practice listening, learning, being in relation to the more than human world. I put the St. Lawrence River here. This is on a really wintry run because it's just a great example over and over for me. It explained to me in no uncertain terms when I wasn't even listening and thinking I was asking the question, why Montreal is where it is. Because there's rapids. And when the white folk came, we didn't know how to navigate the rapids. The folks who were there already did. They had their ways and places and helped us out. But Montreal is where Montreal is because there are rapids. And I could look in the history books and find things out, but the rapids are like, well, duh, it's very clear. Rapids are also turbulent. They're kind of crazy and they're beautiful. And so they also showed me, because I see all the bird watchers lined up, all these interesting things. I see the people, the tourists, like, oh, the most difficult, turbulent spaces are where the most power and potential happens to be. So this is just one example of listening to other life forms. I could go on about this one. Those things keep me motivated. So put yourself in the paradigm you want. Stay open to contradiction and listen to the more than humans. Super quick, now we know. Really expensive consulting work tells us the obvious that we already knew, which is there's garbage all around us and companies are getting paid to do it and we're getting paid to take it away. And then some. Even the banks who say they're tree planters are actually investing in oil and gas and all the things that we are using while we kill birds by thinking we're building sustainable buildings. And we think this is good. We're voting for it. We're paying for it. We're signing up for more. And so we need to really ask, what is possible? What can we do differently? What do we need to understand so that we can move out of these norms where we pay for things that continue to perpetuate the problem? And there's lots of possibilities, listening to the more than human world, etc. That is where I will pause and ask you, what do you want to do about this? So thank you for your attention thus far.
Lorraine, I love your 3 bonus round tips. They're amazing.
Thank
So
you.
I actually wanted you to speak about the number one as you do it, because I think when we think about how do we live into it, what do we do? To me, there's a lot of like guilt and hardship, like, oh no, I'm gonna have to like wash another mayonnaise jar or whatever. It's like to live this better life, and we're always like trying to do the perfect thing, and then it's not working, and then we see some more examples of how it's not working, and so there's I think been a very constrained, guilt-ridden way of trying to be less bad of a human.
Yeah.
And so when you're saying live into this world of something better, I think you and your life have really done that in a way that isn't bad and guilt-ridden, that is joyful, exciting, freedom-creating. So I would ask you to share a little bit with us about what it looks like to live into that world, but not be doing it under the weight of the world's problems, but be doing it in the imagination of what life could be like.
I love that question. Thank you. I'm going to do something I learned from Stéphane Dion, who I guess was a politician a while ago, which was I'm going to take a couple questions at once, because often I find there's kind of clusters of inquiry, and then I promise I will answer. So I just wanted to see, does anybody else want to weigh in with a similar or different question? And I'll just field a couple and then come back to you. Others with things brewing. Don't be shy. Yep.
Thanks, Lorraine. Really loved your third bonus round opportunity and listening to all the life forms. And I wondered, love to hear your point of view on achieving legal status for rivers and forests and natural places and even species, if we're ready to go that far.
Yeah. Oh, these are fun questions. Anybody else want to weigh in with one before yeah, please go ahead.
Which corporation have you come across that is most in service of life?
That one's really easy to answer. Thank you. Those are great questions. I'll do my best to answer them all. But unlike Stefan Dion, I may not actually remember them all, so I might ask you to refresh. It was really cool watching him do that. I'll work in reverse order because the last one, the question was really which corporation have I seen that I think is most working in service of life? I'll be really honest and say I haven't seen one, certainly not at a large scale within the existing publicly traded corporate model where they're required to disclose corporate quarterly or every half year. In some jurisdictions that's more common. They're required to disclose a whole bunch of stuff, and then sometimes if they want, or if they're really, if they're pulled into the ESG journey, they will also disclose more. I see a lot of great activity. I see a lot of really sort of well-meaning initiatives. I have yet to see a corporation that I believe is they sort of get up in the morning and go to bed at night with the purpose of generating revenue in a way that enables life to thrive, that isn't kind of a marketing like do this and you'll be healthy. I think there are examples of companies delivering incredible life-affirming services, products, etc. But large-scale corporate publicly traded, which is kind of my main swim lane in terms of disclosures and experience, I believe they are actually currently allergic to that model. Like literally the corporate entity has an immune reaction to it. It is so countervailing to how they are designed that they can't absorb it. When it comes in, it gets spat out. So one very specific example that I know of, Danone, when I did the materiality assessment on them, the reason I did it was actually because I thought they might be an example. Why did I think that? Because the now former CEO, Emmanuel Faber, I don't know how he pronounces his last name, I kind of happened upon an investor call. So most, I believe all publicly traded companies make their investor earnings calls public. You can actually dial in. You have to be a registered analyst or have some specific reason to be able to ask a question off mute. But any one of us can dial in and listen. And if we happen to not want to dial in on that day or we miss it, it's recorded. You can go back and listen. You can read all the transcripts. I've had this weird habit since about 2016 of reading and or listening to investor earnings calls quite regularly. So I've spotted some patterns and some things have jumped out, kind of an intuitive journey of like, oh, I think Danone has an earnings call coming up. I think I might listen. And by the way, if you're interested in intuition, Sydney Bloom's whole podcast and Substack is all about it, and we're super aligned on this. Anyway, I intuited my way to a Danone earnings call where Emmanuel Faber was talking about soil health, which one of you had mentioned as really important, talking about regenerative agriculture, talking about staking the future of the business strategy on agriculture that is restorative to the people who produce, to the soils and the lands where the products are produced. I was blown away. I literally, and it's happening to me right now, I literally got shivers listening to that investor earnings call. That's kind of a statement, right? I'm listening to an earnings call from a global food company, and the CEO is talking to the investors about where they are going, and I am getting chills and I am choking up. So I put a little pin in that call. I was like, ooh, watch these guys. This is really cool. And so then this was 2018, when I got around to unhooking from the corporate work I was doing and thinking, wait, I want to look for reality in materiality. I was like, Danone, what are they up to? And my heart broke because in the interim, he had been walked out the door. There was some shuffle kerfuffle. I'm not privy to it. There was some interim co-CEOs, which is never a good sign, and then a brand new CEO whose name is escaping, but it's long and hyphenated and ends with de Saint-Afrique. And now they talk about sustainability. They talk about how they're very proud to have a new sustainability, chief sustainability officer who's looking after all of the important issues. Never mentioned soil again on an earnings call. Perhaps they've mentioned it amongst themselves. Never mentioned any of those chills generating words. So my interpretation of that, which is anecdotal, observed as an outsider, is that the current structure is not yet ready. But I believe it can and will be when we go, hey, wait, wouldn't it be great if everything we did served life and or we noticed what undermines it and we stopped doing that? That's an unfortunate answer. I do believe there are small and privately held and emergent companies that are important, and we should notice them and energize them when we can. And I'd love to open it up in a bit and see if anybody knows of any that they want to tell us about and energize. But I'll swoop back into the questions around the motivation. And one was, how do I live in that paradigm? Because I seem kind of cheerful, even though rinsing our mayonnaise jars turns out to be not really worth our time. And the other one was about, oh golly, help me out.
Legal status.
Legal status, right, thank you. Okay, yeah, and I will go in reverse order. I think the legal status thing is interesting. In fact, to be very transparent, that's what first really put this idea on my radar in this kind of professional context, if we can call this a professional context, in that I think up until then I was very, like a lot of you, I love being outside. I love listening and learning in the great wide open, and I've done that most of my life in different ways. But I hadn't yet switched on to, well, what does that mean to my work? And then I started to notice talk about legal status for different bioregions, et cetera. And at first, a little bit like the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, when they were hatched by the UN in 2015, at first I was super keen. I'm like, yes, this is awesome. This is what we need. We need legal status for rivers. We need forests to be recognized as real living entities. And now, unfortunately, I kind of lump it into the same category of, did I mention uncomfortable? Law in general. If we need a law to tell us not to do something, the problem probably isn't, is the law correct or not? It's, why do we need a law to tell us that? And I'm not going to come out fully anti-law, but I am going to say it's worth examining why we need to codify the things we're codifying. Because it's usually a pointer to something we don't understand at a kind of cellular level. So the fact that we need the fact that it's kind of a novel idea that a river might have a point of view that's centering the needs of a bioregion might be useful. I still am compassionate with my former self for loving that idea, and I still kind of love the idea, but I actually think it's a little bit like sustainability generally, where it's like, if we just had better goals, if we just had more stakeholder engagement roundtables, it's like, no, we need to stop making money by poisoning rivers. We need to stop making money by paying people to pick up garbage that we never should have produced in the first place. So we need to reimagine or re-remember the things that we are born with. We know how to feel good. We know how to look after each other. We know when we feel good being looked after by each other. So that leads me to the first piece, which is, how do I stay in this paradigm? I mean, anyone who's spent a little bit of time with me will know that I definitely have my dark days. I get sad and I kind of lose track of the paradigm I want. But I think, if I'm honest, and even those of you who spend a lot of time, keep me honest and heckle if this doesn't sound true, I think I come back to it because it just feels so much better. So for example, Sarah, let's stick with the recycling thing because it's sort of easy, we sort of all deal with it in some way. I've been in recycling plants, right? I did a big work for a coffee company that shall remain nameless that was trying to deal with these little cups that were not getting recycled. So anyway, I got to follow some of those through the whole recycling chain over and over. I worked with a lot of different companies backstage in their loop closing efforts. So I saw up close and personal the bales of stuff and what happens to them. And some of it's pretty cool. It's like Willy Wonka. I actually love going into these places. And I see that data, and I see the lawns, right? I walk around and I see the garbage. So I can get really snared in the fishing nets in my head if I spend a lot of time sitting with the trouble. And as soon as the trouble comes in, I have two choices. I can get help, or I can seek relief. What I think happens, especially with those 2/3 of the discomfort receivers, is relief seeking. And I will certainly seek relief in my own way too, where it's it doesn't feel good. I don't like feeling this way. I don't like feeling that there's nothing I can do, that even though I've seen better ways, the better ways aren't happening. I'm not a recycler. What am I? As in, I don't run a recycling plant. I can seek relief. I can, sit down and breathe. I can watch Netflix. I can drink more wine. There's lots of things I can do to seek relief. And I'm not suggesting that that's a bad thing, because sometimes getting relief from extreme discomfort is helpful. Calms our nervous system, brings us relief. But what I probably need is help. And help is a way to change. So you get help when you want to change something. And so if I can get help when I see something like that, I will do it. So for instance, what I do for help around the recycling thing is, oh, that was for you, sorry, Kim, is I try to find out what's going on. I ask people who understand. So in a way, the paradigm and the complexity thing are very closely related. If I'm sitting there in my own little mental silo going, God, the whole thing really sucks, or I'm just surrounding myself with people who are like, yeah, it sucks, it does suck, oh my God, the whole thing, yeah, sucks, then we are angry about how badly it sucks, and we're not changing anything. But if I step towards, well, it could be better, what would better look like? I don't know, I have inklings, who knows? Do you know? Do you know? Do you guys have ideas? And I seek out ways in my own mind, in my reading, in something else, and I listen, well, you think it could be this, but you think, no, that doesn't, it's going to be this other thing. Oh, wow, those are like diametrically opposed. Or, well, that works in Canada, but it's not going to work in Ethiopia, right? Huh. I just sit with it and notice what I don't understand. And I have found that, to my surprise, I mean, this may sound crazy, like you just sit with things that don't agree with each other and stop saying it sucks. Yeah. I actually find that very powerful. The other thing I do, I know you weren't doing this for me to say this, Sarah, but I will say I also seek emotional support from coaches like Sarah, who has a great Substack about emotional support and does amazing work. So I ask for help. I say, I'm having trouble. This is stressful. It's causing me distress. I want to feel better so that I can take more action, so that I can share what I'm learning, so I can crane my neck over lobbying data. I didn't go into the lobbying post, but I did a post on in the material world about following the lobbying money. It was about, depending on how you count it, about 40 to 60 hours of digging through the lobbying database that is public. Anyone can see it, but most people don't. And so it really hurt my neck. And it was really sad and depressing to see that Barrick Gold, Canadian mining company, spent $3 million lobbying for, about, with, against, we can't really tell because it's very messy, the sage grouse. A beautiful bird if you've ever seen the sage grouse. So following that money, it looks like they're lobbying to be able to continue to mine in that area. And it's really depressing. It's hard, by the way. I mean, I'll be really honest and say, I think everything I'm talking about in terms of the changes, the dreams, all the recommendations and ideas and the materiality assessments, I think they're more than possible. I think the likelihood of the real changes that I'm dreaming into being, and many of you are, of them being true in my lifetime, is not likely. But I think, well, it's way more fun to work on them so they're true anyway than to be like, screw it, So those were long answers. Anybody have more questions? I'll give shorter answers, I promise. Or do you want to share things you are seeing, doing, you'd like us to energize, etc.? Please, fine sir.
Thanks, Lorraine. A question about, I don't want to guess, it's like in a big segue here, but what is your comment on AI?
What is my comment on AI?
Yeah, what do you think? I mean, I guess it's something complex. And just hearing from what you said here about, going through all this data, I mean, I'm thinking like, could it help in this kind of respect? But I'm sure it's a much more complicated answer, so.
Just before I answer that, what is your thought on it?
Ooh.
Not that I want to steal your answer. I just want to get a bit of a sense, where are you coming from? Because it's such a great big open topic.
I mean, I don't know yet. I mean,
it might be good.
I hear this comment from somebody else that it's like it's evolving so fast, we don't know where it's going, that I end up like my opinion about it be determined about how I feel, my emotional status. Like if it's like, or I feel great, it's probably positive and it's an opportunity. But if I feel sad or something, it's probably we're doomed. So I don't know. It's really complex. I'm personally excited because I'm excited, for lots of shiny things. I guess I like change and stuff. But I also see like the the danger.
Yeah.
And I guess this is where you say that holding both positions at the same time.
Yeah.
I find myself very often in that same spot, so I don't know.
Thank you for sharing that. Does anyone else want to pile a question in? I'll just ask one more because I apparently can't remember three.
Hi. I read something today and I thought to myself, I wonder what Lorraine would say. And it was something along the lines of, you can do good and make money too. What's your take on that? I mean, it's a broad question, but is that even possible, or should we like how much of this is just about pure capitalism and wealth and economic growth, which we know isn't having the effect that people would want it to have. So, yes, thank you.
Late stage capitalism, very boo-boo. Yeah, I'll work in reverse order, and I know I'm going to remember the AI question. So, I mean, I think it's more than possible to make money and do good, depending on what you do. I guess there's a few devils lurking in there in terms of the details. One is what's good, and the other is what's money. Once you solve those little things, then you figure out what works for you. So for instance, although I did characterize what I mean by an economy that works in service of life, it's serving human wellness in a wider ecologically thriving space. And I'd like to lean towards that. Even when you start to break that down, well, you might think that, the Don River really needs lots more human interaction and all kinds of people so that we can fish there and do all kinds of things. I may be like, no, we should just leave it alone and let it rewild, and it got canalized back in the day, and let it start meandering again. And we could completely disagree what would be in service of life. So there's a lot of really important nuance to that. And that's where knowing what would good be, I think it's really important to seek out, how much do I understand who's affected by my decisions? Who benefits, who's harmed, who is centered? So one of the things I see getting really skipped over in corporate land, and it's kind of weird, it's like we've been conditioned as emotionally scarred children by capitalism or something, to not even realize that we weren't really given a lot of choices, right? If you're a kid and your parents made a bunch of choices that overrode what you want, you complained about it. I don't want to go there today. I hate the science center. Whatever it is, you kicked up a fuss. Capitalism's like, we're going to the science center, shut up and get in the car. And you have no choice. Nobody asked you. I'm making assumptions about where you live. I grew up in Toronto and I spend some time here. I'm assuming nobody came to your door and said, hey, how are you feeling about the recycling thing these days? You rinsed your mayonnaise jar. How's it going? Did you feel good about that? Do you want some help? Do you know that only 9% of your rinsed mayonnaise jars are actually getting recycled? Do you know how different it is in your neighborhood versus the one around the way? You know that there's 444 municipalities in Ontario, and they all handle recycling differently. How are you feeling about that? There's no real engagement. Decisions are made that affect you, that harm them, that center the capitalist, the gainer of the income. So good becomes an interesting question when we just reorient, well, who benefits and who's harmed and whose views are truly centered when decisions are made. And I think that's as important for walking down the street and making decisions about which way you're going to turn and what you buy at the grocery store, as it is if you're in a senior management position making decisions about jobs, about where capital will be invested, about strategic disclosures to investors, right? We're all making decisions all the time. So I just borrow the life-affirming lens as one, some things are super obvious. I know some things are definitely going to undermine my well-being or my ability to bring well-being to others. They're just super obvious, and others are a little more confusing. And that's where we get different views and diverse perspective. But I think it's a really big question. I also said, it depends what you think money is. I mean, I will definitely not be the first person to mention it's a good time to revalue value, right? I have this fantasy. I used to work for a financial services company, and then doing all the sustainability work really kind of sparked this fantasy of wouldn't it be cool if finance financed the end of finance? If there was no more finance, this idea. Some of us had the great pleasure. How many of you saw the Lehman trilogy, which just wrapped up in Toronto? A few hands going up. Well, one of the stars of the show is seated at the back of the room, Jordan Peddle. Sorry, Jordan, I couldn't help it. But anyway, it's a great story for a whole bunch of reasons. Perfect timing to see this ahead of this, where we learn about essentially the roots of capitalism, including things like making money from money. Because that's a fairly new, not everywhere all the time, but it's a fairly new construct, right? That you can make money from money. What is money? So anyways, that's a long-winded way of saying I think you do what feels good, what affirms you, what enables you to be well, and what enables you to enable others to be well in a well world. And that's going to shift and evolve and feel differently. And some of us need a lot to be able to do that because we have big responsibilities, because we like 3 bathrooms. Some of us need almost nothing. And there's no judgment. And will change too. What I've needed years ago is different than what I need now. AI, that's a really easy question. I ghost it. I literally ghost AI, which means for anybody who hasn't been involved in online dating, I just don't respond to it. So I know it's out there. I know it's talking to me, and I'm probably talking to it. This is probably like, I don't know, some AI might have even written this speech. I don't know. You think it was written down. But I don't put my own energy into trying to figure it out. A little bit like I don't put my own energy into trying to figure out, like, you know, how is the Milky Way organized? Like, it's organized in ways that are, I think, pretty cool, in ways that probably I'm like benefiting from right now that I don't even know. But I delegate that one to the universe. And I'm also trusting that just like in all the other decisions that humanity is making all day, every day, there's really cool things going on that are incentivizing greatness, wellness, kindness, generosity. And there's things going on that if I knew about them, I'd probably be physically sick. And I think that's happening all the time across all planes and time and regions and sectors, more in some ways, less in others. And it's not to say I don't care or I don't think we should be concerned. It just kind of bounces off me. Every time I hear AI, I keep thinking of that it stands for actual intelligence. Like literally every time I'm like, it's artificial intelligence. Oh, okay. So I guess I just think, well, what would it look like for actual intelligence to be amplified? And if this other AI can do that, then cool. And could it work in service of life? What would that look like? I will say, I think there's a really important tactical question, and I think you put it there and I'll pull it out, which is, could AI be useful in creating this economy that works in service of life? Are there ways, for example, to get the data organized in a better, more efficient way? Are there tools that could make that happen? I think the answer to that might be yes. I will say in the last 4 years, I've had at least 5, I might be losing count, but definitely more, at least 5, organizations, groups, people come at me, because I signal around this stuff that you're seeing, saying, have I got a tool for you? And it's AI driven and it's gonna be awesome. And they've got a plan for how AI is gonna do the thing. And in each case, I've said, tell me more, like tell me as much as you can. And usually it's like this. We don't have our funding yet, but here's our beta model. And here's how the model works. And I get them to take the lid off as much as they can. And under the lid, it's basically just a repurposing of existing ESG data frameworks. And as demonstrated, the more of those we do, the more that line that goes like this is celebrated while industrial tree planting runs amok at the hands of the bank, who takes pictures of it and then invests in fossil fuel. So I think there may be potential for AI. I hope really wonderful, smart people who know that it's a good idea to listen to the river, who know that one of the best things we could do for each other is look after each other, you know, who know that the purpose of money is to enable ourselves to be well, that they get their hands on AI and do cool stuff with it. That's my universe. You got that?
I was curious about your framing of this as economy in the service of life. And I'm guessing you've thought about that word, or maybe people have brought this up before, but I'm like, what you're describing to me doesn't clearly sound like economy. And I'm wondering if that is, but I also know your work is kind of centered in economic transactions and companies that play in that area. Is there a point where the vision you have actually maybe goes beyond economy as we know it? Or is it really clear to you that this can be done like with the model that we have?
Okay, I love that. Sure.
Okay, thanks,
You want to build
Anna.
on that and then we'll pass it forward?
Yeah, my question was about what's the organizational model that can be in service of life. So I'm a designer, and there's a similar conversation around design for life, but outside of landscape architecture, I haven't really seen it actually happen. And I recently was involved in a research project that asked, given the context of the 21st century, what is the responsibility of a corporation? Right now, we're only responsible for a fiduciary duty. And I was asking for myself as an entrepreneur, like not a publicly traded company, but still it was very difficult to scratch around what is the organizational model. Like the model itself is so flawed that it can't support design for life. And that that actually needs to be rethought and reimagined together. So I just was curious in the same way, I think.
I've got some thoughts. Do you want to pass it forward? And by the way, load your thoughts. I'm going to see, do people also have things they just want to say or contribute so you know that we know versus questions that I might answer?
So I think this may build on the previous two questions. If we knew today that no matter what we do in the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, it's still, everything's going to collapse environmentally, governance-wise, systems-wise, socially. If you knew that today, where would your efforts focus on tomorrow?
Yeah, I guess I would say, well, for a lot of folks, everything already did collapse. And we're in a really, really, really comfortable place here, where the idea of collapse is like this kind of theoretical Netflix construct. And I say that with a lot of respect, but for example, my friend Chuck Barnett in Ganasatake, he can talk to you about collapse and what it means when the, like the Mata Atlantica that Ricardo Cardim talked about in Sao Paulo. Ugh, I'm getting like goosebumps all down my back right now, that that forest is still there, but it's dismembered, and so much of its ability to keep itself together has been destroyed. It doesn't mean it's beyond repair. That's a murky word, but it doesn't mean it's gone. Just like, and many of us have friends who are First Nations from Turtle Island, will know, well, they're still here. They're teachers and lawyers and amazing people doing amazing things. But there's no question, unless you're super Pollyanna about it, that those communities have in many ways gone through versions of collapse since first contact. And anybody following the political situation in West Papua, which is really easy to ignore over here, but it's not good. And there's been kinds of genocide and collapse happening there for a number of decades that we can't even fathom here. The effects and legacies of, it's not a nice word, but of genocide are among us. Depending on how you count global conflicts or more localized conflict, depending on what you call a war, there are several dozen of these circumstances happening right now, and many of them go way back. So I say that not to be morbid, like, oh, we collapsed ages ago, but like, we probably all know people who know collapse. They may be here because they got out of very, very dangerous, non-viable circumstances. So I say that to say, first of all, we have great learning opportunities from people who have survived collapse, and we should really center their wisdom, their perspective, their resilience whenever we can. I also would invite an awareness of what makes, this is gonna sound, I'll just say it. What am I uncomfortable about with collapse? Is it like I won't have a comfy bed? Is it I don't know what I'll eat? Is it I don't know what I don't know? Like, what is collapse? I've grown up in a very peaceful environment. The most dicey things got is I lived for a year on exchange in Brazil in 1989-90. It was the first democratic election. The new president, who was Fernando Collor, went on to be impeached. Things got a little dicey there. But in the time I was there, they froze all the bank accounts, took 3 zeros off the currency to fight hyperinflation. And it was quite turbulent. Like, imagine all of us, done, bank accounts frozen. You can take some money out, enough to buy groceries for your family, et cetera, but otherwise, no. So the economic turbulence that I experienced as a teenager in Brazil is the closest I've ever come to that kind of like turmoil. I've never been in a war zone. I've been after when there's been peace. So I can't even imagine what I can't imagine. But I would invite you to, this is how I handle the collapse thing. It's certainly, I mentioned some darkness there. Like, it's, I think if I live to be my full life expectancy, it's a few more decades, that's a big if for, of course, all the reasons. I think if I live to my full life expectancy, the world I will be experiencing around me will be very different from the world I'm in now. I was in New York City when Hurricane Sandy hit, and I lived in Sopo, which is where there was power. There was no Po, where there was no power for quite a few days. And not only was there no Po, there was no bread. It was actually wacky to go into even the Whole Foods near me there was almost nothing on the shelves. The roads, I'm a long distance runner, and it was really easy to run there because there was no cars on the road because there was no gas. So that was a little bit Mad Max for a few days. It was like a little test run. And I live in Montreal, we had 3 power outages last year, and there's different reasons why those outages happen. Some of it's because condos are being built. But anyway, so like we get these little signals. Like I don't think there's gonna be a day where it's like, hey everyone, next Tuesday, we're gonna be collapsing. I think we are experiencing late stage capitalism. I think there is a huge degradation of what's happening. Or what has been normal. I was born into great systemic affluence, and I think I will die with a lot of volatility in terms of how that affluence is distributed. So what I do about that is I ask, well, what do I want it to be like when I die? I want finance to finance and to finance. Like I want us to see that this making money from money is an aberration. It's a perversion. Anybody who speaks German will know the word for perverse is widernatürlich, which means against nature. And I love that little Lang clue from German, that if something is perverse, it's because it's against nature. I think it's against nature to make money from money in a way that just hoards and doesn't enable us to be well. So I lean towards making that true. Some people probably think I'm crazy and they have no interest in that being true. I would invite you to consider, what do you want to be true going forward, and lean towards that and worry less about, is this the collapse? Is it 10 years away? Is it 4 years away? Is it 40 years away? And notice it's constant all the time, everywhere. And
I just want to clarify. My question was that if you knew it was coming, what would you be doing differently in your work world today?
Yeah.
And I think this.
It's here, and this is what I'm doing in my work world today. Welcome. Welcome to my world. It's funny, and it's way better when it's funny. This is collapse. I rarely use that word. I actually don't think it's a helpful word because it suggests such a threshold. It was like this, now it's like that. And so the number one thing I want to do more of is learn from big systems. How do you manage? Like the St. Lawrence River, if you go to the old port, which was where the big ships would come, and then you go to the new port, like that river's been trashed. And I asked the St. Lawrence River, how do you handle collapse? We screwed you up. Like we're gross, we dumped sewage in you. We ripped up your shores. All your trees had to refine their roots and make new ones. You had to start with the sumac again and then get the poplar. Sorry about the oaks, And the river's like, yeah. And it tells me more about, but I'm still here, I'm still flowing. So, I don't mean to joke. I think there's real danger. I guess, this is coming back to something, Sarah, you were asking about, like, I stay in the paradigm I want. I don't want to live in a world where if I don't hoard my stuff and lock my doors and have a gun and a gate and have my neighbors protect me and me protect my neighbors, then it's not going to work. No, I don't. Sorry, Mom, plug yours. I don't lock my door. And I plan to never lock my door. Actually, lately, the wind has been blowing my door open, so I have to lock it. And I forgot that I left my key in the door outside. Anyway, this is another story. The paradigm I live in, I have enough to share, and the people who I live near do too, and we share with each other. That may be lunacy, and I may need to start hoarding into Mad Max mode, but I don't want to energize that. I want to recognize that sharing and enabling others to share feels way better than being terrified for my life. Because when I'm terrified, I'm not very creative. It is a big conversation, though. I don't mean to shut it down. But I might just move us on because I've already forgotten the really cool follow-up. Oh, designing, what model works? Yeah. So I don't have this answer. Hey, Lorraine, you're pointing out all these problems about what's not working, late stage capitalism, blah, blah. It's kind of funny sometimes and your pants are falling down. So what do we do? I don't know. I'm not a CEO of a company. I'm not responsible for hundreds of thousands of jobs or trillions of dollars. My hope, my intention by doing this work, I put this lighthouse here, which by the way is a painting by Gary Bray, who's a Montreal-based artist. I think what I am doing is a kind of metaphor that aligns with the lighthouse. I can kind of see the shoal, and I can go, hey, there's some light. I think it's telling us something. I think it's saying there's edges to where we're at, and they're not where we thought we were. Because we all thought the light was over here, but that was something else. It was a really big boat. here's the lighthouse. I don't actually know how to steer an aircraft carrier. I could probably get around in a rowboat, but if it was wavy, I may have some trouble. So what I'm really good at is seeing ESG disclosures for what they are. It's kind of nerdy, but I enjoy it. So I'm doing what I can that I happen to have 20 years of training in, and I got paid pretty well to do it, to say, hey, I found some stuff out, and I think if I put what I found out in front of you, it might be useful to you in some way. But you all have totally other skills that are amazing and different and diverse and needed. And so I'm not sure what it looks like to steer differently. I know what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like smashing into the lighthouse, because nobody wins from that. I think it feels better. I've seen glimmers of it. I do, by the way, when I bump into glimmers of it, like Ricardo Cardim restoring the Mata Atlantica and collaborating with other businesses to do it, although those are the nice charitable initiatives, I try to share it. I try to say, I think it looks like this. But I've yet to see that one big corporate structure. There are people, for example, Anthony, can I single you out? So talk to this gentleman and check out some of the amazing work he's doing around, and there's more, I think you have collaborators and friends here, looking at different governance models, different practices that amplify what would work well. It's a big lift, like we got a long way to go. And then what I'm really trying to do is kind of seep some spores into the airwaves that might take purchase on minds that influence trillions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of jobs in big publicly listed companies, to be like, economy working in service of life? I never thought about that. Because I'll tell you, when I have mentioned it to senior decision makers within companies, when I first say it, like, well, yeah, I have this vision where the economy works in service of life, and they're kind of like, well, you have to be realistic, right? And so this gets to the economy question. Then, by the way, they laugh. They go, you have to be realistic. And then there's this kind of like, oh, it is realistic that the economy would serve life. So why is that? Well, what is the economy? I think we've been told or trained to think it's this thing that smart economists deal with, or people who've done some modeling, maybe actuaries get involved, people with lots of money or lots of responsibility, and the rest of us do other things. The economy is a word, there's so many clues in our language that we got stamped out of us. It literally means looking after our home. I mean, home economics is like saying pita bread, it's repetition, right? Salsa sauce, it's like economics means looking after your home. Home. That's what we got, that's all we got. This great big home, the one we welcome each other in to share meals. The economy, we've been told it's money moving around. It's how we feed and clothe ourselves. It's how we entertain ourselves. It's how we get around. It always has been. And then along came the Lehman Brothers and a few others who were incentivized through new models, through dominant and dominating ways of controlling, and one thing led to another. Greatest book around, which I got to because of you, Bob Willard, The Story of B by Daniel Quinn, is a very compelling look that puts it in such simple, very accessible terms. If you want to feel the kind of roots of the mind view where we kind of forgot. The Story of B by Daniel Quinn, very accessible. These are amazing questions. I could go on and on. I want to bring us to a close, but I did want to just see if there's any one or two or three who want to share some quick reflections about what I didn't say that you think would be beneficial. I'm seeing a couple hands at the back, so we'll take a couple and then see if anybody closer to the front. Yep, please.
I guess to contextualize myself, I was born in collapse in the former Yugoslavia, and I grew up in the Humber River watershed. I was an environmentalist. I walked here, we're stuff from like a decade ago, if not older, but it's frustrating. I want to see systems change much like you, and I appreciate that you're calling out the lack of wisdom in ESG and the way that it's currently done. So you're talking about values. How do you shift thinking in corporate spaces to look at different ontologies, to bring in values, to bring that conversation to place, to look at stuff that Anthony is doing with the Flourishing Business Model Canvas or Donut Economics, and to go, yeah, we do need to care about this. Like what works? What do they listen to? What's that?
Yeah. I'll answer that quickly because it's not a very happy answer, and then I'll see if anybody else wants to weigh in. The simple answer is I don't try to change anybody else's perspective. I learned that trying to convince anybody of anything is a problematic journey. I mean, I hope you've learned something, and I hope you're uncomfortable in energizing ways, but I certainly don't mean to tell you what to think. I only barely know what to think. So what I learned, I mean, honestly, I came to a point where I was like, I don't feel aligned with what we're doing. I'm leaving. And I actually think the most powerful thing I ever did was say no to about $200,000 worth of income every year. Really? You don't want to do more of this work? We pay you so well. We fly you in our private jets. You get to go in helicopters. We love you. We say cool things about you. We put you in front of other people. Yeah. No. I'm not going to do that anymore. What are you going to do instead? I don't know. That, I think, and some of you may know better because you've been on different versions of that equation, either with me or with others. I actually think that was the most convincing thing I ever did. Because saying, you know, this isn't really working. Excuse me, I have a question. You know, that is draining. It's not motivating. And people whose jobs, some smart person said, people whose jobs depend on something being true are not really keen to hear that you think it isn't true. I'm sorry that's my answer, but I appreciate that you note you came from collapse there. I think my mom wants to weigh in, so maybe I'll even give my mom the last word. No? You were trying to say that she had a question? Oh, always giving voice to others. You sure?
I'm just going to say how much I've enjoyed hearing you actually tell everyone what you think. I always love hearing it.
Well, thank you, Mom. Maybe that's a good place to end, as we should wrap up and give the I mean, does anybody jumping really want to say something? We got a couple minutes if you want to, but I'm happy to give us back space. Yeah, let's wrap up. Thank you so much for your time. I just want to acknowledge Bob once again for your kind introduction and your amazing encouragement and generosity to me and so many others, and to all of you for your time. I actually do know a lot of you. I kind of want to call you out one by one, but I won't. I will just say I'm so grateful. This is such a convergence of worlds, of my interconnected communities, people who mean so much to me from so many different angles. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you and good night.